encourage customers to come back later in the week because things were getting out of control.
Latest figures show there are currently 276,000 confirmed cases in the UK and 39,000 reported deaths, although the real figure of excess deaths is now over 65,000 according to estimates.
7 minutes past 8, the death of George Floyd has brought back to the forefront issues of race and inequality, not just in the States, but here in the UK as well.
Well, behind much of the violence currently sweeping America is decades of institutional racism, centuries, in fact. But just how deep-rooted is racism within society here as well? In Britain, joined from the Wirral by former footballer John Barnes. In South London is Sace Holmes-Lewis, the founder of mentoring organisation Mentivity. From North West London is Justin Finlayson, CEO of United Borders. And in South London is lawyer Dr. Shola Moz-Shogbamambu. Welcome to all of you.
Good to see you all.
Morning.
Let's just start with you, John Barnes. You and I have had a lot of lively debates about race issues. And I've got to say, when I watched this George Floyd video, when I watched the whole thing from start to finish, with increasing horror and fury, I suddenly realised, actually, that the problem with this debate, if you're white, is that we can feel horror at something like this. What we can't feel is all the history behind the rage that must build up if you are black and you're watching that and you're seeing a racist white policeman literally snuffing the life out of somebody with total disregard for them because of their skin colour. And I felt that very powerfully with this George Floyd video. Let me ask you, what was your reaction when you saw it? And on a wider point, what should we now be doing collectively, whether you're black, whether you're white? What should we do to try and stop this kind of thing happening as we go forward?
Good morning. Well, first of all, obviously, I was horrified as well, like any human being would be looking at an event like that. However, we have to look at the wider issues as to why things like this should allow to happen. Now, of course, in an overtly racist event like this, we can all, say how terrible it is. But this is just symptomatic of a wider problem that we have in the disenfranchisement of black people generally, in terms of the how we feel intellectually, morally about them. Because if you ask that policeman, Derek Chauvin, whether he thinks he's racist, he will say he's not, because he's married to an Asian woman. So, and Amy Cooper, you saw the woman who was fought in the police against the man in Central Park. She's a white liberal Obama supporter. We believe that racists are just people like Derek Chauvin or white supremacists. The feeling of a negative hierarchical perception of black people comes from the brightest minds, philosophers who have hundreds of years told us that black people are inferior. And it pervades all of society. So this is an obvious one whereby we can get behind and feel horrified. But how do we feel about inequality in the inner cities? Black people not being given jobs, things that you can't prove. We can't pass laws to change this. So, of course, this is an obvious one, and we're all horrified by it. And we feel that after this event, we'll wait for another event to happen to jump on the bandwagon and see how terrible it is. This is an ongoing fight against racism.
Well, I want to play, John, I want to play a clip from Martin Luther King that went viral yesterday. And he was a remarkable man in many ways. But this was a brilliant, I thought, assessment of the roots behind a lot of the problem. Let's watch this.
America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base.
Justin Finlayson, when you watch that, and I've watched a lot of Martin Luther King, he was a remarkable guy in many ways. But when you watch that, there's the history right there that has caused, I think, a lot of the resentment, which has never been tackled properly. When you watch the protests about what's happened to George Floyd, what do you think of the protests this time? They're on the biggest scale in America, apparently since Martin Luther King was assassinated. way bigger than even after what happened to Rodney King. What do you think of these protests? And in particular, should we be disseminating between the peaceful protesters and the ones who are looting, rioting, using violence? Or is it all part of a justified reaction?
Well, the protest itself, it's a continuum. It's the same racial violence that's been around since Dr. King was alive till now. And it's interesting that you mentioned Dr. King. We also have to remember that this is a man that was actually quite hated when he was alive and doing the work that he was doing. When Dr. King was having dogs set on him and his fellow his fellow members, it was almost seen as if he was just rabble rousing. Like, why all this trouble in the streets, you know? And it's poignant that we are in the same position we are today because conditions haven't moved on a great deal.
I mean, in this pandemic, before what happened to George Floyd, we were already seeing people from BAME communities being unfairly targeted, if for want of a better phrase, by the virus. More people dying from most communities than proportionate to the population, both here and in America. We're seeing mass unemployment now, 40 million in America, many people who'll be unemployed, and the hardest hit, again, will be BAME communities, no question. And then you see the appalling discrimination which led to the death of George Floyd. You put all this together, and this is a terrible time for BAME communities. What should white people be doing to help, to actually properly help? I would like to know what can be materially helpful rather than just saying, isn't this awful?
Well, the very first thing I'd suggest is we're witnessing a modern day lynching. And as lynchings go, people were given the day off school and the day off work to go and witness a lynching. Here we have a black man being killed and it's being paraded everywhere. There's no thought of the impact it can have on, you know, black community in particular. Seeing someone that looks exactly like them being killed in broad daylight, I'd suggest that I've literally seen at the beginning of this show, you use the image of a dead man on the floor again. I can't tell you when I've ever seen an image of a dead, you know, white person. I think it would be handled with a lot more sensitivity. A dead black person, however, I'm becoming almost numb. I'm almost desensitized to seeing dead black people, you know, week in, week out on television. The main thing we have to do from a media standpoint is look at people's well-being and understand and appreciate that a lot of people don't actually want to see this. It's very insensitive to highlight and show this every few seconds.
Well, we'll take that on board, Justin, and I think we understand what you're saying. I mean, I would only say, and we were discussing this with the mother of Ahmaud Arbery a little bit earlier on, those videos have brought to light an atrocity in both of those cases that if they hadn't been caught on film, justice would not be served. But I completely understand what you mean about the impact of that. I mean, it is shocking, Justin, that it took the filming of those killings to bring the attention to those deaths that should have been instant.
I'd like to know who's shocked. I don't think people from the black community are shocked anymore. We're actually accustomed to seeing young children, women, you know, men, older men just being killed and displayed like a trophy almost. And it's shocking that it's taken video footage to actually bring those things to light. But that's not all that it took. It took a lot of protesting to get any arrests to happen. So it's, you know, we understand the bad apple theory, but how about good justice? So when bad apples are shown, good justice actually follows and people are persecuted rightly for the crimes that they've committed. We're yet to see that here in the UK. So while we have a US focus, I think there's things that we can concentrate home here that resonates with people from our community.
Dr. Shola, you and I, we've locked horns about a lot of issues. I remember we got quite fiery about the Meghan Markle stuff, whether that was driven by racism. And I defended the media at that time. I didn't think that was what was driving it. But when I've watched the reaction to these three things, funny enough, the story that John Barnes mentioned about this woman in Central Park, in many ways, that was as bad as any of the deaths that I've seen, because what it highlighted to me was that her instinctive reaction was to categorise a very polite black man telling her to do the right thing, tether her dog, which was unleashed in Central Park. Her reaction was to call the authorities and to paint him as a potential killer, to say that she was feeling threatened for her life. And when I watched that,
and
I've
identifying him as an African-American
an African-American man is threatening me and my dog. And when I watched that, I wouldn't say the penny dropped, because when I was in America at CNN, I covered many of these stories, from Trayvon Martin to others, and I found them all horrific. But it was the way that she did that, this privileged white woman from a top firm in America, the way she was prepared to paint this guy who did nothing wrong as a potential killer. In that moment, I understand what you had said to me before about sometimes we don't, as white people, we may not even see that kind of thing, or why it is so insidious.
That's right. I mean, it's what I would call weaponizing whiteness against black people. And this is not new to us at all. And I think the reason for this is because fundamentally people don't understand what racism is. The fact that it is a systemic power construct to deny an equal value of life and liberty to black people for the benefit of white people. And it means that white people get a privilege from that. That white privilege means that they are treated favorably in comparison to people of color. So I would always say that in this discussion, the discourse, the fight, the equality for black people, it is so important to understand that racism is not just hate, that this systemic racism is entrenched in society. That's why white folks need to exercise their privilege to stop racism perpetrated by other white people and by institutions. And even well-meaning, white allies who say, you know what, I'm not racist, who say, I don't see color. I don't see color is a problem. Because if you don't see color, you don't see me. And if you don't see me, you cannot possibly see the abuse I get because of the color of my skin. So it is so important that we understand that the Amy Coopers exist here in the United Kingdom. And I know people say, oh, the United Kingdom is not as bad as the US. I say these people are suffering from selective amnesia. They've conveniently forgotten, the Sean Wiggs, the Rashawn Charles, Stephen Lawrence. They've, conveniently forgotten Windrush, Grenfell, or the fact that just a number of months ago, the Home Office was found to be institutionally racist. But because now in 2020, we have so much more video evidence of discrimination, video evidence of racism. People are becoming, it's becoming so much more visible, but there's so much more you don't get to film. Amy Cooper, like rightly said, Piers, she was at the top, she had a top position at one of the top financial institutions in the world, the head of investment solutions. Now, people who think that racism happens outside the corporate office, not understanding that mindset she has, she takes it into the corporate office, weaponizes her whiteness against black staff. So, and when black people complain about discrimination, complain about racism at work, they're told that, the narrative is twisted. And what happens is that white privilege covers the Amy Coopers, and that white privilege is then weaponized against black people and make black people look like they're the problem.
Well, I don't think. I don't think you can look at that video in Central Park and not draw that absolute conclusion. I found it horrifying to watch a smart, supposedly intelligent, highly privileged, well-paid woman, prepared to do that, prepared to paint a guy she didn't know, who'd been perfectly reasonable, as a potential killer simply because of the colour of his skin, and to name him as an African-American, threatened to kill me, when we could all see he hadn't done that. Let me bring in...
It happens all the time.
Listen, I've taken a view with this. If this is the stuff we're seeing on camera from phones, whether it's Ahmaud Arbery being hunted down in a lynching and murdered by two white racists who just had decided he had to die, or whether you're seeing George Floyd, the worst thing about the George Floyd video is that for nearly 3 minutes at the end, he's unconscious, and still that white policeman knees down hard on his neck, even when he can see that he is not conscious. I find that unconscionable, literally. And then you see the Amy Cooper one, and you realise that this if this stuff is what we're seeing, what the hell are we not seeing? Let me bring in
Holmes-Lewis.
Holmes-Lewis. You know, I assume there's a lot of this going on that we don't see on mobile phone now. And the question then is, when you see these protests in America on this scale, what do you feel? You know, Barack Obama has come out and said, please don't loot, don't be violent, don't burn buildings. Martin Luther King was a very peaceful man. He always advocated violence begets violence, hatred begets hate. Don't do that. What do you feel about the protesters? Because millions are protesting peacefully, but some are clearly looting, arsoning, and so on. What do you think about that?
To be honest, I think that's a reflection of the governments across the world, especially the UK and the USA. They're founded on violence, founded on conquest, subjugation of black people and marginalised people across the world. So this is reflective of how people are feeling, and this is what is demonstrated by the governments across the world. And these conquests are fueled by violence. And I think, to be honest, I think this is not just about white privilege, this is about white ignorance. This is about ignoring what black people have been saying for years, and we've protested in a peaceful manner. We've tried to do the right things, and things have just been destroyed. The Black Panther movement destroyed. Civil rights movement pretty much destroyed. And there's been a war on black people for as long as I can remember, centuries. And the fact is that this is orchestrated systemic racism towards black people. And yet when we say...
I think I apologise for interrupting, but I think you make such an important point about ignorance, about your experience. Yes. And I'm just looking at the notes about what you have experienced, even during lockdown.
Yes.
How many times have you been stopped and searched in your life, and how many times have you been stopped and searched during this lockdown?
So I've been stopped and searched over 30 times in my life. I was assaulted by a police officer at the age of 14, just going home from school on a train from Gypsy Hill. And he asked me to get off the train, and I asked him what was the reason, and then he assaulted me. Me and my mother took it to court, but the CPS threw it out through lack of evidence, even though we had CCTV footage and eyewitness accounts. So that is the injustice that fueled my kind of disdain towards the police.
And then you've experienced that, not the assault, but you've experienced us being stopped 30 times in your lifetime. And how old are you, if you don't mind me asking? Sorry.
37. I'm 37. I've been stopped 4 times during lockdown. The well-documented one I filmed, the end of the experience with the police. And the fact of the matter is that we've had enough. And the fact is we've been asking for you guys to understand from our point of view and listen to us, but you don't. And I think if white people approach racism and say have coronavirus, racism would be null and void. But the fact is that you have...
See, that's a really interesting point, I think. And I've heard the same argument about climate change, that if we all showed the interest and the anger about racism or climate change, as we've all shown about coronavirus, and if the world came together, we might actually get stuff fixed. John Barnes, let me ask you, a lot of football people are protesting. We saw Jadon Sancho playing in Germany and wearing a shirt supporting George Floyd. Of course, he got booked, which is just so ironic, isn't it, that he gets punished.
The Liverpool team have taken a knee.
The Liverpool team all took a knee yesterday, your former team. How important is it? I saw Lewis Hamilton getting very exercised, quite rightly, on social media. A very powerful post saying he's one of the very few black people in Formula One. He didn't see any of his white Formula One drivers or owners coming out publicly to show solidarity with him. It's a very powerful post. What do you think the responsibility is for people in the sporting world? And is it almost more important that white people in sport show themselves at this moment?
But it's very important for everyone. Of course, sportsmen are role models, so it's important for them to show support for social causes. But of course, this is a very obvious one because of George Floyd or because of the overt racism that we actually see. What I'd like to see them do is also show support for what people would consider more minor situations in the inner cities, whereby kids can't get an education, housing, access to social health care. These are the big problems that really affects the black community. Now, what we're witnessing is racial events. The George Floyd, the Amy Cooper. We witness racial events, and then when those racial events happen, we then come out and support, as we have done, and wait for another racial event to happen until we start to challenge racism. And there's a difference between a racial event and racism. Racism is insidious, it is continual, every day, whereby black people are negatively impacted on every single day when they go to the shops, when they go to school, when they try and get housing. That's what we have to challenge. And once we get rid of racism, racist events will stop happening.
And we also, I think, John, I think we have to see it. You know, one of the most powerful moments for me on this show we've ever had was after BAFTA, after a full push of diversity, ended up with all the nominees being white. And I asked Andy Peters, who does our competitions, he's been in TV a long time, and I asked him, you know, why is it that that can happen when you're pushing for diversity? Why do all the nominees end up being white? And he said, well, have you looked around your own studio? Mm-hmm. And he said, look, I'm the only non-white person here. Yeah. And as I look around now, we're all white in this studio. No, there's only 8 of us here. Normally there'd be a lot more. But in other words, if you don't create the opportunity from the bottom up, how do things ever change? And I felt that...
You can't be what you can't see.
Right, and he said his point being, we didn't see it. We hadn't noticed. And he was so right. And that really resonated with me, is that actually you can talk all you like about diversity, but if you don't see it in the way that a black person sees it, nothing will change.
Can I just quickly add?
One second. You don't see it because you're not affected by it. Black footballers, black actors, we see it. But in the black community, they see it even more. Because as a black footballer, I saw it on a Saturday when a banana came on the field. A black member of the community sees it every day when they go to work, when they walk down the street, when they're going to shops. They see it every day. So therefore, who can highlight it? The people with the platforms. Yeah. So as much as Jadon Sancho wears that T-shirt saying support George Floyd, I would much rather wear a T-shirt that says say support knife crime in Kennington. Kids who can't get jobs, kids who can't get an education, because they have the platform to show people. So therefore, if you want to see it, let the black leaders highlight it.
I just want to ask Sace, because this is a really important about something that you were doing in lockdown, and we need to see, if I can use that word, what happened to you. You were out delivering food to friends who had lost a family member through COVID. You were pulled over by the police, and what happened?
So I was on my way to my second drop, and I saw police officers that pulled over a black and white boy and searching them in their vehicle. I pulled over, ran down my window, asked them if they were okay just to check because it looked a bit distressful. Then I went to the shop to get some dates to break my fast. Got back into my car for no longer than 30 seconds. I was driving, and the same police officers pulled me over under the Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act. They ascertained in 30 seconds that I was a drug dealer and that I was a negative person in the community, when I'm an upstanding black man that's founded a mentoring organisation. I've coached Jadon Sancho for 4 or 5 years. So many football players in the Premier League I've coached. I've done a lot in my community. 21 years I've dedicated myself to the community. I tried to go into honest, open dialogue with the police, but they were absolute in their judgment that I was a criminal. And I was outraged, and that's why I decided to take it further. So now I'm in dialogue with the Met Police. We've agreed in principle to run a training program to train these officers how to speak to people within our communities, but also to get them to understand cultural equity. Because what they do is conscious bias. It's not unconscious. This is their worldview. This is their construct. And through racism, the system that we have, they're allowed to carry out these acts and treat us as second-class citizens. When my grandparents came here in the Windrush and contributed to rebuilding this country. Yes. So the fact of the matter is, even when I went to identify myself, there was no black British on the slip. So what does that say to me? What does that say to young people? They can do it to me, an upstanding black man in the community. They can do that to a 14-year-old, which I saw yesterday, a 14-year-old being thrown into a police van, distressed, being restrained, being held down against his will. That's not right, and I've had enough. So now I'm in dialogue with the police to roll this out and to do our Raising Aspirations project through Mentivity to actually raise awareness in terms of how we can...
It's very, you know, it's very...
One second, Piers.
And it's very interesting to say... Hang on. Sorry.
Once again, how they can become part of the system, because we need to infiltrate every facet of society. We can't look at sport to solve issues in society. We have to look at society first. And we have to have honest dialogue with white people. You have to have honest dialogue with us and not dismiss what we say when we talk about racism and talk about victimization, because you guys do seek to benefit from it. And we've been at the bottom rungs of the ladder, but we still persevere. We still push on.
You know, one of the most powerful things I saw... I'll come to you in a second, Sholo. One of the things I want to say was, in America, one of the most powerful things I've seen, you've seen some policemen take the knee in support, including white policemen doing that. And that's been a powerful thing to watch in America. Sholo, you want to make a final point?
Yes, please. And I want to just highlight, in addition to what he said earlier, how we are being silenced from talking about racism. So just as what he's experienced, imagine that for activists like me, that when we speak out about it, we are attacked as anti-white. We are attacked as being racist to white people because we're calling out racism that is perpetrated by white people and by institutions controlled by white people. That is a strategy to silence us, which will not work. Definitely will not work with me, because people do not understand that there is no such thing as reverse racism of black people on generations of white people. There is no power construct that can possibly make it possible for black people to deny an equal value of life and liberty to white people. Doesn't exist. So white people do not experience racism as black people have experienced. And this does not mean white people are racist. It means they need to wake up. This needs to be a wake-up call.
I totally
that there's a lot of work to be done.
Shola, unbelievably, I agree with every word you've just said. So there we are. That's how things have changed. Final word to you, Justin, because you've been sitting there quietly.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate Face's point that, we both run youth provisions. United Borders is about closing some of the gaps that's there through racial practices, and bringing communities, particularly young people, because they're being unfairly targeted right now. If we look at some of the stop and search figures, they say what they say. During Corona, a viral breakout, we're 54% more likely to be stopped and searched and fined. These things are only going to stop once we can work closer with police and actually get police doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is, providing a service for our young people. So we're no different. We're trying to close that gap and, avert a situation where we could potentially be where we see our counterparts, America.
And you know what? I think giving half an hour, pretty much what we've just done, to this debate is important. I think taking half an hour of a show like Good Morning Britain and airing all this is part of the way we get to a better place.
But we also acknowledge it is not enough.
Yes,
John,
just got to say.
Justin, Dr. Shola, thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's get the news.
Let us know your thoughts on that. So many important issues raised there. Don't think just because we don't have the kind of protests you see in America, there's not the same issues in this country, because there are. And we have to wake up to it, exactly as Dr. Shola just said. We need to wake up. It doesn't mean that if you're white, that you're just racist. It means you may not have made enough effort to understand what it's like to be a black person in this country or America, what it's like to see coronavirus targeting your community worse, or unemployment or other issues targeting your communities worse. We've got to be more awake to it.
Now let's get the news, travel and weather where you are, and we will see you in just a moment.